Hello, hi, good afternoon, welcome back. A quick 5-minute break there from Advita and Priya's session. We're now on to a new session with a panel, a bunch of people that work in the NHS. So we've got all different departments and from different areas here. As you can see, it looks a little bit different again. Unfortunately, the pesky firewall that has been put up is trying to defeat us, but it's fine. We've got it. So I'm going to pass over now to Anthony, who is chairing the panel. He will introduce everyone, everyone will introduce themselves, and we'll kick straight into it. As always, if you've got any questions, just put them in the Q&A tab, and we will get to these when we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for that. If I start introducing myself, actually, I should start by saying I'm very glad the firewall is working in the NHS. I'd be worried if it wasn't. So hello, my name is Anthony Tiernan. I'm the Director of Communications for the London Ambulance Service. Just go round. Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire Riley. I'm Exec Director of Communications, Corporate Governance, Communications and Involvement for the Integrated Care Board in the North East and North Cumbria. And I can tell you now, that is pretty hard to say.
Dennis.
Hi, I'm Dennis Campbell, the Health Policy Editor. I'm main NHS reporter for The Guardian.
Thank you. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Jarman. I am Director of Corporate Affairs at Milton Keynes Hospital.
And last and definitely not least, Manjeet.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Ranjit Kale, I'm Director of Comms for South London and Maudsley and also for South East London ICB.
Thank you. So just, I think, a bit of an intro, really. I mean, obviously, this whole session is for for communicators, not just NHS communicators, the whole Comms Hero event, I know that. But obviously, I'm sure people will be really aware that professional communicators across the world, alongside doctors, nurses, scientists, and many others, have played a vital role in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously, prior to the arrival of vaccines in late 2020, and we'll always remember Maggie Keenan having that first jab in the UK. Public communicators public communications been one of the key ways in which we could, and countries across the world could, protect our populations. And part of that was obviously encouraging local people to act differently to protect themselves by changing their behaviour. So what we're going to talk about today was the experience of our colleagues here, and sort of focusing on what went well, what didn't go so well, and how we could do things differently. So I think, Claire, I was going to come to you first. If we could sort of maybe look at the good, what went well for you?
No problem, Ant. And firstly, can I thank everyone for the opportunity to reflect on this time, actually. I think it's very easy as communications professionals to just move on to the next job. And I think it's really important that we take the time to reflect. It almost feels like a lifetime away, but actually we're still dealing with it. And I think it's a really interesting times that we're transitioning through at the moment. And I think probably in a year or two's time, there'll be another pause for reflection because we'll again be in a different place. And I think actually that's something that we're starting to do quite well. Certainly within the communications fraternity is that reflection, that learning and understanding exactly what are the things that we need to learn from, what are the things we keep and what are the things that we don't have to do anymore. But I think a big thank you to NHS Comms colleagues. At the time, I was working in a provider organisation, and I've never worked under as much intensity as I have during that time. And notwithstanding all of what the doctors and the nurses and all of the clinicians were facing, actually what we do, we faced an intensity that I don't think any of us have probably experienced before. But we leaned on each other, we supported each other, we shared our work, we shared ideas with each other, we tackled the challenges with each other, we supported each other, and there was a camaraderie across the whole of the NHS communications professionals that probably I've never witnessed before. And granted, I'm not an NHS lifer. I've been in the NHS since 2007, actually. But that's still quite a long time, and I've never witnessed that before. I think also some of the challenges that we've got within what we do is talking about impact, talking about the value add that we bring as a professional into the NHS. actually, I think if you look at the work that we've been able to support, whether or not it's vaccination program, whether or not it's adherence to the rules and regulations, whether or not it's building trust and confidence during a really, really difficult time, there's a huge amount of impact that can be reviewed there, and learning from that should influence what we do into the future. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think the evidence around the value add that we brought during that time is very, very clear. I think it would be remiss of me not to talk about the North East and North Cumbria mobilisation. It was absolutely fantastic. I think that we had daily comms calls. We coordinated media policy, so we were given the media consistent messaging. We had a common cause. We came together. We supported each other, and actually built even stronger relationships than we had, not just within our profession, but also with our partners. And finally, and it's probably not very often you would hear me say this, but a massive shout out to our media partners. I think their responsiveness, their proactivity, their keenness to work with us locally, I think was excellent. And I think our local media and national media, I think we worked really well with, and I think that should be celebrated as a good, actually, Anne.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. Dennis, I know you'll see it from a slightly different angle. What's the good side for you?
So, well, first of all, just to echo what Claire just said, that obviously COVID's arrival in spring 2020 sort of triggered, the most difficult, the most challenging period of my long working life, the most confusing, because COVID was like sort of a story comet from outer space that just exploded. The intensity that Claire mentioned very much echoed that. Intense due to the intense, relentless demands from the Guardian news desk for stories and knowledge and insight and guidance. Also the adjustment obviously to immediate and total working from home, combined with having school-aged children who were allegedly studying at home but not actually doing much of that. Just the sheer slog involved, the long days, 12, 14-hour days, sometimes finding stories from the smallest room in the house because it was so mad and intense, and also the need to get it right, which I think, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think that we, the Guardian, decided we were going to be highly responsible, cautious if need be, etc. Very, very fact and evidence-based in our reporting of this, what was clearly the biggest story ever at the time. Briefly, just practically, so that my boss at the Guardian were very smart. They very quickly redesignated 3 very talented general reporting colleagues to work with myself and Sarah Bosley, our then health editor, and obviously the 4 science people. So we almost immediately had a team of 9 people who knew something, or in some cases, in Sarah's case, an awful lot about pandemics and things like that, having reported them all the previous ones before. So we were very much on it. The demands on us were said fairly relentless, but to be honest, I'd be denying if I said it wasn't thrilling to be one of the key people here with a very close involvement in the biggest story ever. But would I want to go back and have that experience again? No, not really. Too much. What worked well? So I'm going to say the things that worked well, it really helped us, given that we were all working from home, contacting, communicating with our colleagues, always remotely. There was immediately a relentless new scheduled diet of things to keep up with, release of figures and statistics, press conference briefings, etc. We covered all of that pretty well. Myself, health and science colleagues doing a lot of it. Our lobby colleagues doing particularly the 5 p.m. Downing Street briefings. We were helped by scientific and medical experts. We had people who already knew between us. We were helped by the individual contacts we already had, in my case, kind of across the NHS, doctors, chief execs, union reps, a whole range of people. But you'll notice, and we'll come on to this, that in the list I've just given you, there were some, but not as many as I would have liked, NHS comms people, some very good ones because there are some outstanding ones, but not enough, and sort of not quite a climate of fear, but sort of a veil of unhelpfulness fell down, which was uncomfortable and awkward and difficult to negotiate, and constrained the reporting one could do. But we'll come on to talk about that in the next section, I think.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Kate, what was good for you?
Thank you. I think probably I'm going to repeat some of the things that people have already said. We had an early start with COVID in Milton Keynes as a comms community and as a community full stop, because we had the second repatriation centre from Wuhan of British citizens coming back in February 2020. So we had that kind of early getting together as a major incident response community, and I like working in major incidents. I started my career in the police. It's kind of what I'm used to. I think the duration of COVID and the intensity of it over a long period of time really tested that actually for us as professionals, and it tested all of us, I think, organisationally. So it was really evident, I suppose, in that early start that the communications community could come together really well together, and actually we're willing to muck in, support, and do what comms do really well, which I guess may also be a bit of an issue for comms, to act as a sort of hub, an enabling function for other people to sort of roll up our sleeves and get on with stuff. For me, I think internal comms was something that was really great out of the pandemic. We really transformed internal comms. We started engaging very differently. We had to engage very differently with people working from home. You might have seen, I don't know what the background is like for this, but my kids and a dog walked in the middle of this, so some of it's definitely not good. But working from home, engaging with people in a different way, I think we really looked into people's lives in a different way during the pandemic, and we got to know people, I think, in our organisations, and certainly probably in leadership teams. We exposed ourselves and all our vulnerabilities and kind of all of the bits of stuff about us that people don't normally see into our living rooms and desks and in small kids' bedrooms where I'm talking at the moment. And I think that changes organisations. Actually, it changes the style of leadership for organisations, and it changes how you lead, which I think is a positive. It makes it more human. So internal comms engagement definitely are good. We've tried different things, we've done different things. I think hybrid working, enabling people to link up and work differently. Everyone from our clinical teams, virtual ward rounds, we introduced all sorts of stuff during the pandemic, has been a positive. Would we want to do it in those circumstances again? As Dennis said, absolutely not. We wouldn't want it to be talked about by major incidents, but major incidents do generate change and opportunity, and that happens with COVID. I would also echo Claire's points around media partners. We had some phenomenal media partners and did some great work with media nationally, regionally, locally, and they were absolutely great through the pandemic, and really great to work with, actually, really supportive, really were that sort of feeling again that you get in a major incident, that you're kind of in it together. So we'd also say a big thank you to them too, and I can come on to some of the more challenging bits in a second.
We're saving the juicy bits at the end. I did see the dog a minute ago, Kate, by the way. That's good. Ranjit, what was your favourite good bit?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it colleagues have covered, and I think as terrible as COVID was, there were some really excellent points that came together. So I think there's something about solidarity in a sense that this was one enemy we all understood, and actually we all for what is a giant bureaucracy actually came together in such a way to as a single cause to be able to make a difference. And I think comms had such a leading role within that, and often we've struggled tirelessly working away, slogging our guts out, trying to get either internal comms right or messages agreed by various boards, etc. But actually comms moved overnight from what some may say is a kind of like a periphery, where we've struggled to define strategic value, to actually, as Claire was saying, and others, how comms became very central to this, whether we're working with media partners or we're working internally, or with our communities. So I think we instantly demonstrated just why good strategic comms was of such importance to organisations. Those organisations that had invested, got really good results, and others who hadn't suddenly started to find themselves investing quickly because they just recognised they needed to go to up their game. The other thing I was going to say, which I thought was really positive, having worked in public sector for a vast majority of my life, was just the overwhelming ability to overcome, as I said, bureaucracy in vast swoops. When you were told computer says no 100 times why something couldn't happen, suddenly overnight people were doing webinars, broadcasts, people were all over the place. It was magic. You could just make things happen, and there was no bother to it. Hybrid working, what was an impossibility, or suddenly became the norm. And everybody who'd previously said no, I need to have everybody in the office working to these hours was proved wrong. That when productivity went up, and I think that was just a really special time when we were working together in a way that was really effective. And I think it came across really well. And I genuinely think comms is better of it, having to have gone through something that was really quite awful. But from a comms perspective, I think they were some of the good things.
Thank you very much. So Claire, I'm going to come on to you. I'm going to merge the next, I'm conscious of time, merge the next two bits in together. So what wasn't so good? And we did use the word ugly. What drove you a bit mad? And I suppose then that little bit of, if it ever happened again, God forbid, what could we do differently?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to start with a positive on this one, as I know people know that I've been very vocal about this in a number of different forums, but I do believe lessons have been learned and continue to be learned around what a number of us have experienced, not just through COVID, but actually before COVID too. But notwithstanding this, we do need to be honest with ourselves and each other, and there were things that weren't great. There were things that were really difficult for some in the NHS or out of the NHS, local or national. And I think that it's really important to reflect that whilst I've got a local opinion on that, equally, I'm sure it was difficult for national colleagues too. And I don't necessarily understand the pressures they were on. I just felt the other side of it. And I think it's important to reflect on that. But I have to say the expected model or the constraints within that model of delivery during a level 4 incident were not feasible in light of the type of crisis that we were dealing with. And I think that underpins a lot of then the subsequent ugly part of the behaviours that we dealt with. And that was whether or not you worked in the NHS, or actually, Dennis, you alluded to in your point around what you were dealing with. So the length, the 24/7 world, the importance of local voice, the need for visibility locally wasn't necessarily reflected in what was deemed as a level 4 incident in that point. And that was a real difficult juggle for us locally. At one point we had a local police chief talking about the NHS in front of a hospital because there was not approvals to be able to have an NHS voice. And that just doesn't seem right at all. It doesn't build trust and confidence. It looks like the NHS is trying to hide things. And I think partly, of course, we had also doctors tweeting about how difficult it was, and then let's not talk about the PPE. It's easy to forget all of the challenges that we've gone through as part of this. But this is a 24/7 world that we just weren't geared up to be able to respond to in that way. And I think it's really important that we go back to the model, because we shouldn't lose sight of that, because that's the things that needs to change. And really that model is something that we need to evolve, because let's heaven forbid we're in that situation again. We should never ever get to that point. And from a behaviours point of view, sadly, there were some that were not acceptable. There were some that were never acceptable. And it's partly linked because of the model and the need for power and control. And it's the classic issues that underpin relationship issues. It doesn't matter whether or not you're in the NHS or out the NHS or anything else. And I think we didn't really have that mutual respect. There hadn't been enough emphasis on relationships before we went into the pandemic, which then led to the situation that a number of us had to deal with. I had many people ringing me throughout the pandemic, whether or not they were in tears, they had mental health issues as a result of some of the challenges that they were facing. those who are really senior professionals having a crisis in confidence. But actually what was good is back to the support in the network. We actually had the people around to pick people up, to support, and ultimately focus on doing the right thing. Power and behaviour should not get in the way of doing the right thing. And I think ultimately that's what underpinned action at a local level, and certainly what underpinned action in the North East and North Cumbria. But really, what's sad about it, the behaviours and the power has taken over the debate. And what I'm really keen to do is almost we've experienced that. We need to move on. We need to invest in relationships. We need to focus on relationships. We also need to get the model right, because if the model's not right, the behaviours and relationships will just go out the window.
Thank you very much, Claire. Dennis, again, I think you're going to see it from a slightly different, but I'm sure you probably feel some of the pain that we've felt and colleagues have felt.
So several things, and all what I'm about to say prefaced by the fact that I appreciate totally that NHS comms people do not operate in a vacuum and are not the authors and architects of what they do and what they say and what they're allowed to do, because you are part of a system. You all have bosses, they have bosses, it all goes up to the top of the tree. So I accept that that's the real world. Certainly the immediate switch to central control of all communications was unhelpful, to put it mildly. The fact that trusts like the ones you all work in all had to reference, as far as I know, everything up from day one, from the smallest to the biggest thing, from the most routine to the most sensitive or difficult query, up with the delay and the obfuscation and frustrations that involved for you and for us was hugely unhelpful, and it took a bit of while to comprehend just how total this was, and my news desk were like, well, why can't you just get an answer from the hospital about that simple question? And the answer was because they couldn't get sign off to it. You all know this and have the scars to bear. The fact that in everything this kind of sort of basically presage control freakery on a scale I've never seen before in the NHS, and a range of behaviours I associate with I think we've seen with sort of government PR since roughly the time of Tony Blair: spin, unhelpfulness, denial, occasional deceit, a whole set of behaviours that where negative should never have been allowed and should be anathema to a public service organisation and it's particularly its communications people. The fact that everything had to go through the NHS and the press office, it didn't just slow it down, but ended up getting denials of stories that turned out to be true. And we haven't at the time, so I won't go into it, but just we ran, myself and a colleague did a series of stories over some weeks about the creation of and initial weeks of the London Nightingale Hospital first, which obviously was seen as a sort of a great moment at the time, as a really positive thing, a really resourceful response to an emergency. We did a whole series of stories about the profile of the patients who would be in there, the tiny number of patients who end up actually going there, the difficulty getting staff to go and work there for all sorts of internal reasons, and the high death rate, all impeccably sourced. We weren't going to write about something as high profile and not get it right. All of them were denied. All of the stories were true. That's just one example. I won't bore you with anything more. I just want to say, and what this time, I mean, this is the last thing I get to say, but I do worry that there are a number of enduring, all unhelpful legacies from an NHS communications and therefore communications and media interaction point of view, which is that I see, I experience sadly much too often from a combination of NHS England and some but not all trusts sort of what seems to be an attitude and instinctive position of sort of minimal helpfulness, reference up for everything, opaqueness, sometimes deception. And I just thinking in August, I was trying to write about the cyber attack on the NHS at the time, and the response from NHS England centrally to all queries from all journalists about any detail about this very important thing, which was obviously disrupting and in some cases crippling a whole range of NHS services with one paragraph, which I've got here, one paragraph in what turned out to be a 4-page briefing, which was sent out to senior people in the NHS, which spelled out in detail. But you as a group of communications people on behalf of your organisations, all of which were disrupted to various degrees, were not allowed to tell us any of that. And, you know, for the umpteenth time in my life, particularly recently, one relies on a friendly, trusting contact from the NHS who thinks, as I do, that probably kind of need to know this stuff. So unhelpfulness, opaqueness, also just on a simple kind of human, practical, day-to-day level, the loss of what used to be normal contact between journalists and NHS PRs, and off-the-record chat to talk the story through on a kind of trusting, entirely off-the-record basis. You know, remember them? They're sort of becoming a bit like dinosaurs in red phone boxes, aren't they? And the fact that I now see that NHS PRs as a general breed, not all, but worryingly many, seem to do everything by email, never pick up the phone, want to do everything by email, never actually speak to anyone. I mean, I say this is a phenomenon of behaviour I notice across PR generally, and I do with, you know, zillions of PRs every week. And that's really, really worrying, and I worry that that's become a new permanent sort of form of sort of semi-official estrangement between us and you. And as you all know from your great experience on the number of great creative constructive stories you've enabled and your counterparts in similar mindset across the system, whenever you trust journalists to get it right, health journalists generally do, and I worry that the dial is now going in the direction of unhelpfulness and estrangement, and a bit of a sort of a glacial age rather than the period of trusting, working together, which some of the journalism, the amazing journalism produced, enabled by NHS trusts during the pandemic, shows that should be the road ahead.
Thank you very much for that, Dennis. Kate, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to speak quickly.
I'm going to keep it really brief. So I won't talk about media. There's a couple of things for me. One is the duration of the pandemic. So the length of the pandemic from a communications and everything else perspective makes it really hard. So it moves from major incident really to about humanitarian kind of incident. So actually keeping people motivated and well through that, really, really challenging. I think sometimes the pace of change of national guidance became confusing and chaotic. And as communicators, we had to constantly try and interpret that and get it right. And the consequences of not getting that right when it's safety critical information are massive. And actually that was really difficult some days, really hard. And you're very conscious that actually communicating the wrong information about protective equipment could be life-changing for people. One thing I really wish I'd done differently and would certainly do differently again is communicating about visiting. So visiting restrictions and the impact, I think they were hugely underestimated, probably under-communicated. There wasn't enough focus on that. And I wish dearly that I'd done that differently, actually, because of the impact it's had on families, lasting harm for people. And the other thing, very briefly, is reflection. We haven't done the pause. We haven't come together as a communications community at large in the NHS to come together, reflect and learn. I would really love to see a communications kind of post-major incident handbook coming out that we could all contribute to and hand down recommendations for us as professionals and organisationally that are adopted by NHS England and NHS organisations to pick up on some of these points and make sure that the next major incident we face, these same issues that we've talked about briefly today won't happen again, but also that we maximise the good.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ranjit, in 1 minute, if you wouldn't mind, the bad and the ugly. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, a lot of it colleagues have covered, so I won't rehearse that at all. I just guess for me, it's about dinosaurs wanting to go back to how it was, before the pandemic. And I just think we've got to continue to fight the good fight to be able to make sure we keep hold of everything that's good, recognizing what colleagues have already spoken about, the bad and the ugly. But for me, it's progress that we need to continue to make.
Thank you very much, Ranjit. I think probably to summarise really, because I think we've only got a minute or so. There's a bit about sort of caught between saying, gosh, it's 2 years and so much has happened and we've all moved on, to actually I still think there are some wounds isn't the right word, but a lot of stuff to fix. But I think personally, there's a bit about, and I probably shouldn't say this, I'm now moving back to NHS England for a short period of time, but I think actually a lot of that fixing can be done and will be done at that local and regional level. And obviously we've now, in the last 6 months or so, introduced a new, whilst the job, the title of the organisation doesn't always sound sexy, the new ICBs and ICSs and all of those things have introduced, but that gives us that opportunity to look at it differently, where we will be doing it regionally and as collectives, as hospitals within those large footprints, to actually rebuild those relationships, whether it's as an NHS or with journalists or with stakeholders and other people that maybe we've cut off or disenfranchised, and or build on those successes that we had. I think I'm about to be switched off. So can I just say a massive thank you to Claire, to Kate, to Dennis, and to Vanjeet. Hopefully people that have joined us found this helpful. Felt slightly therapeutic listening to my colleagues talk about some of this. So maybe if we did this again in the year, it'd come across slightly differently, but I still think it's quite early.
Yes, thank you everyone. It's been amazing. I'll just pick up a few points from the chat so that you guys can see them. So we've had we've had Asif say, great point about reflection. Often we know we don't have time for reflection. It's easily overlooked, and that's one of the reasons why we set up Comms Hero, to reflect on projects that we all work from in all these different industries, from NHS, construction, housing association, anything. And then we've also had something from Andrew Gledhill, who works for a housing association. He says that they've just made a short film regarding our colleagues' experience through COVID, and most of those that contributed felt it was worthwhile exercise just to reflect on what they did and what they went through, and that they actually found the exercise really humbling, which was really nice. And we just had another thing come through from Jude Tipper, I think, and then it says, such a good session. Thank you all so much for your experiences. So again, a lot of thank you now. So we've got a thank you from Jules Loveland. So thank you all for sharing your experiences